All right, what is up, everybody? Eddie Barco here once again, and welcome to the Nebula Music Podcast. As many of you already know, but I will repeat it just in case you're new, this is a show where we talk to some of the coolest and most inspiring musicians, artists, and anyone who's doing something really cool in the music industry. We have them on the show to explore their mindset, and today is definitely no exception because I have somebody from a very cool band that I recently got introduced to them, and I immediately became very impressed, not only with their history, but the kind of music that they make, and they're incredibly talented, and I could probably spend a very long time just building them up, and I would much rather not have me ramble on. I would much rather have my guests be the one that actually talks about themselves and talks about their creativity and all of that. So without further ado, I have Miss Ariel Bloomer from Icon for Hire joining me today. How are you, Ariel?
What's up? I'm great. How about you?
I am doing great. Hopefully that was a good enough intro. Hopefully I built you
That
up
was
enough.
solid. You've done this before, my friend.
Oh man, you know what? I've made so many mistakes in the past that I've tried my best to make sure I get your name right, that I get it right from the start, because that's kind of like what I want to make sure that I do. And you know, one of the things I've been asking a lot of artists lately, it's kind of the trend right now, but I do feel like it's kind of important for a lot of musicians out there to know is how have you been dealing with this whole lockdown quarantine thing? Are you based in like the West Coast or East Coast by any chance?
We are central. We're in Nashville.
Oh, that's right. Okay, cool. So if I can ask you, like, how is the whole sentiment over there in Nashville right now? I've had plenty of people come from like New York and LA on the show, but I haven't had someone from Nashville in a good minute. So I'm wondering, like, how is the whole scene over there dealing with this whole lockdown stuff that we're going through, and is it affecting you in any way? I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, it's just okay over here. Tennessee is one of the states with no mask mandate, which is pretty sucky. So cases aren't as bad as, like, for example, our families live in Illinois, and cases there are in a really bad spot right now. But Tennessee is not thriving by any means. And I don't really know what the state of Nashville is because we haven't left our homes, really. I don't go anywhere. I mean, sometimes I'll do groceries if I'm feeling really daring and edgy, but all my friends are immune compromised, so I don't even see them like outside or just like socially distanced or anything. So it's been really isolating, and we're doing really well professionally, so that's comforting. However, like personally and emotionally, we have good days and bad days for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Can I ask you, when quarantine first started, which was, God, back in March, which was almost a year ago, were you guys in the middle of anything? Were you like in the middle of a tour or any kind of projects, and then you had to stop it when this whole thing started?
Oh, Eddie, we sure were. We were on tour in Europe, promoting some new songs. And we had to cancel our last run of shows that were in Italy. And then I think our Switzerland show as well, we had to cancel. So it was kind of weird. We played Russia first, and, we were somewhat familiar with this virus, but it seemed that then we headed into like mainland Europe area. And as every show we did, it got scarier and scarier. And it was very much like, what's going to happen, up in the air. And we played our last show. I honestly don't even remember where. We were lucky enough to reschedule our flights. And we landed Wednesday night, mid-March. So I think it was we landed at the same moment that Trump announced that the borders were closing.
Jesus.
So it was really freaky, but we're so grateful we made it out. And we actually just got notification from our airline that they're going to finally refund us for the original flights, which is a huge win that we weren't expecting. So we're really grateful for that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you made it back on time. I had a couple friends over here who were from the UK. Shout out to Hannah and Annie. And they were here right before the lockdown, and I don't even think they weren't sure they were going to be able to make it out, but they flew out right before the lockdown happened, and they got home safely.
Yep.
I'm wondering, when you were over there, you said you were in Switzerland, Russia, Italy. What was the vibe like as all this was starting to break down? Because that's something that I'm not really aware of. I was here, in California when everything went down. And so obviously I'm aware of what happened here and somewhat like in the United States, but you guys were actually in Europe when this happened. I'm wondering, was everybody scared? Was everyone just kind of confused? Like, what was your takeaway of what the vibe was over there versus here when this was happening?
I imagine that it was a little bit more heightened in Europe than it was over in the States. And it did seem like, I think cases progressed there more quickly than in the States. So show-wise, shows were still good, but we did during VIP meet and greet start, like taking photos a few feet apart, like trying not to like give fans hugs and stuff like that. But I'd say there was actually still a lot of tourists out. We still were going out to eat at that point. We didn't know any better. There was one incident in a country like Prague. It might not have been Prague. I'm really bad at remembering what cities we were in, but it was a country like that, something really beautiful. And we were out sightseeing. We went back to the hotel, and in the hotel were men in hazmat suits surrounding a couple who looked like they were Chinese. I don't know if they were or not, but at the time everyone was calling it the China virus, which is so politically incorrect, of course.
Yeah.
And we're asking the hotel officials what's going on, and they explained these were visitors from China, and I don't know if they were being profiled or if they actually had the virus, but that was the first time that we kind of saw something in our face, like, oh snap, this is weird and scary. What is going on?
Yeah, dude. I mean, it's a very politically incorrect way to classify that, which is it's very sucky. And if you don't mind me asking, this could be very, very personal and one of those instances where we don't have to include this in the interview. But I'm wondering do you feel comfortable if I ask you a little bit more about like your political views? Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
So if I can ask you just personally, like as a musician, I feel like what I've gathered from most people that are musicians, at least, they're very much all on the same page when it comes to this quarantine. Like everyone wants to get back out on the road or to perform. So everyone's kind of a team player from what I gather, obviously. But being from, being in LA, because I'm in LA, we're kind of in a bubble here. And I'm very aware of that what we feel is happening in the world is very different sometimes, versus what's happening in the nation. What we think about here in LA is typically very different. I'm wondering for you, you're out in Nashville, which is a beautiful city. I love it. Every time I go there, I want to move. But, I feel like the state of Tennessee as a whole, it can be a little bit different to, other states that are a little more creative heavy. Do you align yourself with like the political views that are in that state? Or do you find yourself that most musicians are more, I don't want to say left or right, but I guess more of a team player when it comes to trying to beat this virus? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, so we live in East Nashville, which is a bubble that is going to take the mask mandate more seriously, for sure. So we are in a artistic part of town. And so you're going to find, I think, people that align more with that. Now, that said, we were also, Nashville made headlines, I think, in July for this awful rager party that was thrown incidentally like 10 minutes from where we live. Yeah. So,
wow.
It's full of all of it. Gosh, I've got most of my friends are really on board with following protocol. And then I've got a few people who aren't necessarily my friends, but I know of them. And they're like, this is a hoax. And I'm just like, oh my God, well, we're not going to hang out, bro. So like, I'm not going to take that risk with you if you're not following proper protocol. Because I think this is something where we all just have to look out for each other, even if it doesn't affect your livelihood or affect your family or you're not at risk. Okay, but let's see if we can think about people outside of that besides ourselves.
Gotcha. You seem very comfortable with what you believe in. Like whenever you feel like you have to do something, and I'm gathering this after speaking with you for about like 10, 15 minutes, but you seem like you're very comfortable with like, hey, this is what it is for me. And if you don't align with that, hey, no big deal, but I'm going my way. Is that fair to assume?
I think so. I mean, you might be giving me more credit than I deserve. I don't know.
Well, you're saying all this live, so I'm assuming that you are like pretty comfortable with it.
Yeah, I guess I kind of, live and die by my own authenticity and flaws. And I know that I'm going to be more comfortable surviving as a human being in the world if I do what I feel is best for me, but don't take myself too seriously. So I try to, I have to go to sleep at night feeling good about my decisions with what I know. I have to try to educate myself and also be aware there's a lot of stuff that I don't know and that I'm going to get wrong, and just kind of make space for that I'm going to screw up just as many times as I get something right,
Yeah. Well, I love your vibe already, and I love that you are honest. I can gather that from the very beginning, and you want to go to bed at night, with a clear conscience, and I appreciate that. So one of the things that I like to do on the show is I like to kind of explore how, people got started with music and, how their careers sort of branched off from there. So if you don't mind me asking you, maybe giving me a quick little rundown of how you found yourself doing music and how that turned, into your career, and then we can sort of branch off a little more from there.
Yeah. I was like the obnoxious teenage punk girl that wanted to be a rock star really bad. And so every time I would meet pretty much anyone, I saw them through that lens, like, are you going to be in my band or not? That was essentially the question for me. Like my whole middle school and high school career, quote unquote, was that. And then I finally met Sean when I was 18, convinced him to start a band with me. Then, it was pretty much on from that point. We were able to quit our day jobs about a year or two in. And since then, we've done a bunch of other artistic things on the side. It's not like we were paying our rent through music, but we were paying our rent through creative endeavors in general. And then, we did a label thing for a while. We actually consciously, intentionally left that through a lot of hard work and concentrated effort. And now we've been independent for 4 or 5 years, and we love it. It's amazing. It's the secret to happiness. So that's been really nice. We have a really good fan base that helps with that too, of course.
Yeah. And I'm happy for you because I feel like as an independent artist, this is a conversation that comes up all the time. And I feel like everyone's opinions on it are pretty much, you either are for it or you're not. It's very rare when you find someone who's in the middle ground. But for you, it clearly has worked to go independent, and that's something I'm always curious to explore. What was the reason that you wanted to break away and become, like your own entity and take care of everything yourself? Because that's pretty much what an independent artist does. You obviously hire people more, but like you're not relying on the label anymore. So I'm wondering for you, like, why did you decide to go independent, and why was it the best choice for you?
Yeah, I'd say, we were excited about the label thing at first. And then as we were on that for more, I think we were with them for about 5 years. And they did some good things for us. They opened some doors for us. But then we were on our second album, and there really wasn't the promotion behind it that we were promised, that we were expecting. So, for example, our second album has no music videos to it. There was no push to it. We were organizing our own tours around it. And this wasn't, from my understanding was, this wasn't due to low sales. We were actually the highest new selling band on that label. So it didn't make sense to us. And then we were in Europe on a tour that the label did not help us get, but a tour that we were able to get through our booking agent. We were on this great tour, Hollywood Undead in Europe, living our dreams. We come back from that and we're $40,000 in debt, and wow. We're looking around us at all these other bands that were signed similar time as us on the same label. And unfortunately, they were going out of business. All these bands were having to close up shop, having to say, we got to go back to our day jobs. We can't keep doing this. So we saw that that's where we were headed if we continued with this model. So we actually did something really drastic. We ended up filing bankruptcy. We paid we paid the label. It was just in the last couple of years that we weren't writing a monthly check to our record label, even years after we got out of that contract. We never saw, any money from, and it's not about money, but it is about being able to continue doing what you love. And if you can't, because you can't afford to, that's when it becomes a little bit more about the money, Yeah. So we just couldn't afford to keep going under the label system.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting? I feel like when it comes to how the money works for a lot of artists, that's where it gets a little confusing for most people, just because it's such a elusive thing that you don't really have to deal with until you actually get there and you have to do the finances yourself and you see all of it. It can get a little intimidating, but the fact that you guys were $40K in debt, when you guys came back, that must have been a huge like punch in the gut. At least that's what I would assume. I mean, if I can ask you, like, how did that? And this is a very broad question, but I feel like I've heard many stories of people throwing in the towel after that, because that's a huge amount of money, but you guys did not. And it was clearly the right choice. But looking back in hindsight, that's easy to say, nowadays, and looking back at it and being like, yeah, we stuck with it. It was great. We figured it out. But I imagine at the time that wasn't the case, or at least maybe partly wasn't the case. I'm wondering, like, how did you feel when you came back from this tour with the Hollywood Undead, who were really, really cool? And then you were in debt. Like, how did that affect your belief in what you were doing to some extent?
Yeah, it gave us that turning point to decide, okay, this is not going to be a path that's sustainable for us. If we want to keep going and making music, we're going to have to find a different way to go about this. And that's when we start thinking about being independent. But I'd say really the emotional toll sunk in a little bit later, early 2015, so a few months after the tour, when we're in bankruptcy court, day in and day out, and we're getting all these like crazy long letters from the label saying that they want to confiscate our computers, saying that they own everything we've created in the last 5 years, even if they haven't heard it. They were even, I don't know the legal terms for this. Thank God I'm not in that space right now, so I don't have to think about it. But
I'm sorry for bringing you back to that space.
Oh, it's all good. It's good to see where we've come from, and good to learn from it. But we were getting letters basically saying that they could come and seize our personal property to help recoup, to help pay these debts, so we're looking around our little homes and looking at, are they going to take our furniture away? Are they going to take our books away? These were this was on the table, that literally our life would belong to them. And so that was psychologically stressful AF, of course. And we didn't know if the bankruptcy proceedings would go in our favor or not. And so what that turned into was Sean, our guitar player, he turned to alcoholism, and he found out he was an alcoholic through that experience, you know.
Oh,
And
wow.
we did Warped Tour where the booze was free flowing and literally free and endless. And he went to rehab, you know, the next day after we got back from Warped Tour, and then he's been sober ever since. And, you know, our drummer left after that experience. He was like, I'm done. He wanted a normal life. So a lot imploded in the wake of that, for sure.
Wow. Oh my God.
Yeah.
There's so much to unpack there. You know, what's crazy, I feel like a lot of people are grateful that they don't have to go through a bankruptcy. At least hopefully that's everybody's wish. But you guys actually went through the whole notion. If you don't mind me unpacking a couple things here, when you guys decided to, you know, go through this bankruptcy progress or process rather, was that your choice or was that the label's choice? Remind me again.
That was our choice.
Your
Yep.
choice. Okay. So once you actually do that as a band, like what happens, if you don't mind me again picking at this, because I feel like most artists, they have never gone through something like this. And I really pray to God that they never do. But I'm sure they might be kind of curious when that happens as a band. What happens immediately after you file it? And then what, the label has to like agree to the terms or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, this honestly, this would be better questions for Sean than me because I was a slightly less involved than he was. You know, he had been handling a lot of our finances.
Yeah.
But it was a lot. It was a huge drain on time and resources. It felt like a bunch of busy work, a bunch of paperwork, you know, them combing through bank statements, profit and loss sheets. You know, we're meeting with attorneys, and obviously that's costing us money as well. So much fear. You know, for example, we didn't know if we would ever be able to perform our own songs ever again. These are songs that we wrote, that we own, that we have our heart and soul in, and they still own those first two albums. And that is pretty soul crushing. Like one of my dreams would be to be able to buy those back one day, Taylor Swift style or whatever, because it's hard to know that some dude in suits who effed us over own our art. Like that was the most psychologically, you know, painful, I'd say here.
Yeah. And one of the things that I find very interesting is that this whole notion of, you know, people stealing, not even stealing, but I would say, you know, very much manipulating a system so that they can take people's works. That is something that has become very much common knowledge over the past decade, I guess I would say, how like the whole facade of how things work. And by the way, before I even say anything, I will preface this by saying like I feel like there is in terms of business, there is like a happy medium ground that usually works for some people, but I do feel like both sides need to be educated for that to work. But anyways, besides that, one of the things that I find interesting is that once you find out how shady a lot of the things can be, it can become very much draining and very much an obstacle to be like, then why the fuck are we here? You know, why are we doing this? It's just so fucking corrupt. And then to try and pick all that up on your own and go off on your own, that takes a lot of fucking courage. And I don't know how you guys managed to do that, but if I can ask just randomly, when you found out that Sean was suffering through alcoholism or he was going through some problems, did you at all feel like you had some sort of responsibility for that? And I'm not saying you did. I'm just asking, I imagine like as a band member, when I used to be part of a band and someone had issues or, you know, someone went through something, because it was kind of like a team effort, to some extent, I felt partly responsible, you know, and I'm wondering if like you had a similar experience to that or maybe not. I don't know.
That's an interesting question. What we're not mentioning here is that Sean is my husband. We've been married for over 10 years. And so I was focused more on the emotional side of, oh, my career might be going down the drain. My marriage is going down the drain. I'm losing everything all at once. So I was more in this self-protective place and I was obviously trying to get him help, but I wasn't thinking that this was my fault in any way, you know, and that's something that you learn as a supporter to someone in treatment or in recovery. You learn to set personal boundaries and not take on that responsibility too much, you know?
Yeah.
But it was definitely a lot of the time. And he handled it well. And I'm glad we went through that. I'm glad he got that part of his life over with, because it would suck if it was dragged out for 10 years. You don't know you're an addict until you go too far, until you hit your own limitations. And I'm glad he did that.
Yeah, I'm very happy to hear that is something that happened and you dealt with it and, you know, you kind of moved on from there. Have you ever, since you saw it happen to your husband, which by the way, congratulations, 10 years is a very long time, very good amount of time. So congratulations on that. But I'm wondering for you, when you watched your husband go through this very painful experience, did you ever worry that you might go through something like that? Maybe not through alcoholism, but through something similar. Did you ever worry that through all this stress, you might actually, I don't know, find something about yourself that you didn't like?
It's possible. I think I was more in a state of fear of my future. I was in survival mode. But I just know that we handle things differently. And I know that I've already I'm not saying I've dealt with my demons by any means, but I'm saying I have gone through a lot of my own issues that made themselves very evident to me earlier in my life, like through my teenage years. And I think maybe he didn't run into some of his issues until this time, but I had been battling my demons of self-hatred, depression, anxiety, all the bullshit of being a human being. I had been in the mud of that for many years prior to that and finding coping mechanisms. And so I felt like my foundation was solid enough to at least help me get through that, but who knows? I mean, in 5 years, who knows? Or I might be in an alley somewhere. I don't know.
I know it's that eternal question of like trying to figure out what would have been. At the end of the day, to some extent, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but it's because it didn't happen. So you just live your life the way it's happening. And I'm really happy with the way that you view life, because I feel like I ask these questions mostly out of curiosity, but also because I feel like I'm in an interesting position where I get to listen to different artists, both established and some up and coming. And it's interesting to really analyze what goes on inside our brains, especially when you're trying to do something creative. And at some point when you do this long enough, you find these similarities. You find where like similar doubts happen, where similar decisions happen.
Pattern.
Exactly. And you find that it's very, very common. And so I'm always trying to figure out, like, not necessarily what is the trigger, but why is that the case? And so, and it is interesting for me that as creatives, it's very common to fall into these patterns where we feel like we have so much on our shoulders, or maybe something happened, and we tend to do not self-destructive things, but things that are not necessarily so good for us. If you don't mind me picking your brain a little bit, do you feel like for you, I mean, you kind of did already say it in some extent, but I'm wondering if I could kind of dig at it a little bit. You did mention how when you were a little younger, you kind of dealt with your own things, and so maybe you grew out of it. But I'm wondering, do you feel like that's part of the key to being successful, or at least living a happy life in this industry, or being a creative, is to allow yourself time to deal with all that and then be able to move on from it? Or does it really just vary on who you are? Because I don't know.
I mean, that's a great question. I do think it's part of the secret of maybe being a functioning human being is addressing our dark sides, and that's what I try to do in my music. But like you, I'm curious here, what your conversations are with other artists, and if you find, do they appear to be healthy and happy, or are a lot of people drowning? It's very interesting to me when I see artists who, like NF is an example, who seems to, have been struggling for many years, not really enjoying the path that he's been on. This is maybe a year or two ago when a lot of those interviews were surfacing. I don't know where he's at now, but sometimes you see people who, the larger they get, it seems like, unfortunately, the less happy that they are.
Yeah.
So, and I've definitely struggled with, everything on that spectrum, but I'm okay right now. So I'm grateful for that.
You seem okay. That's the beauty of it that I love about talking to you, is I feel comfortable talking to you. I feel like, to some extent, I feel like you're at peace. Obviously things happen in life, so you kind of adjust with no matter what happens. But part of what's interesting about you is that you seem very much aware of, like, okay, things happen and I deal with them and I move on. What I find that is very common amongst musicians is there is this dwelling thing. I'm not sure if you've maybe picked it up from other people, but I do feel like a lot of artists that I have come across with, and by the way, you did bring up a good point about it depends on who they are and where they are. Are they drowning? Are they just coasting? Whatever. But I do find that there is this sort of problem with dwelling on shit that's happened before, or like, you know what I mean? And I'm not sure if you have that or if you dealt with that when you were younger, but I feel like part of, not the problem, I don't want to say problem, but I do feel like that nagging issue that a lot of creatives have with the doubt comes from this like inability to let go of some shit. I don't know. Like, I feel like I'm rambling here. I don't know.
Kind of about like that victimhood thinking.
Not even victimhood. I don't want to say victimhood, because I do feel like that's a fine line. I just feel like here, let me put it this way. I feel like a lot of artists that I've talked to, me personally, there's a few of them who've kind of like you have like learned to deal with their issues, and they've moved on and they're living life in balance to some extent and they're happy. But the vast majority, there is this sort of tendency to push things down and to cover it all up with work, if that makes sense.
Because all of us believe that we will be happy when we're successful. Like, it's just built into Western culture. We're taught this, that if we try hard enough, there will be happiness on the other side of that. But what I've found is that my workaholism has been a hindrance to my happiness. And so I've had to kind of find that balance where I can have both forward movement in my career and sanity in my brain.
How did you do that? And I know that's a broad question, but did you ever, I mean, I know it's just, this is turning into a therapy session for myself, to be honest with you, but I do appreciate your honesty. Like, did you ever consciously set out to try and change the way you were living, or did it just
100%. Oh, I'm such an obsessive. I'm like obsessed with trying to scale the walls of my own brain and make peace with myself and figure things out. And that's a journey I've been on for a long time because it was so intense when I was 13, 14, 15. I was so miserable. I like could not believe that this was the human experience. I was so disappointed, like with my own, temperament and my brain chemistry. It was just suffocating. So when I was about 17, 18, when I got just a little bit of space from that and I could finally like compose my own thoughts and like feel like a normal human being, I started on this journey of trying to learn how to take care of myself, how to love myself, how to stop hating myself, how to stop being in the depths of despair. And so I had to kind of cut ties with that part of myself. And I've done so much work. Like I journal every day for like an hour. That's what I have to do just as a maintenance program for well-being. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting because I feel like for me, I just went through something like that very recently, like maybe 2 years ago. I think I talked about this a couple times with some other artists, but like for me, for example, I spent maybe a little over a decade just really not feeling satisfied with a lot of things, very similar to what you described. And I tried a whole bunch of things, but for me, it actually ended up being meditation that helped me quite a bit.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, like, and I've told this story many times. I don't want to bore people about it, but essentially the gist for me was, people told me to try and meditate, and I tried it, and I felt like I was doing it wrong for a good 2 years, and then I finally decided to fuck it. I'm gonna try it my own way. I keep trying to empty my mind, nothing's working, and I just sat there. And that moment that I decided to just do it my own way was the very first time I ever had an experience where I sat there for like an hour and a half, and I didn't feel it. I just felt like it was a very interesting experience. But my point is, I found this thing that I could do to, I don't know, like start exploring why I felt the way I felt. And I feel way more balanced now than I ever did, even like 10 years ago. But I did feel like that work lifestyle, like just I need to work on music, do this, perform there, do this. That was the solution. And then I very much woke up to the idea, like, actually, that's not the solution at all. And I know that sounds cliche, but like, how did you try journaling? Did you try other things to try and like come to peace with what you were feeling?
Well, I started journaling like religiously when I was about 12 or 13 because I really needed to document what I was going through because I wanted to be a grown up and then help people like myself. And that's part of the reason why I'm an artist and why I get so motivated to do this work and to write the songs that I do, because I am trying to still heal and connect with my 13, 14-year-old self and others like me. But yeah, journaling is always people, people suggested that I meditate for many years. I have tried it without much success. And I think I get from journaling what people get from meditation.
Yeah.
And I also like to read a lot. I was really into self-help books a few years ago. And now I'm kind of taking a break from that because I'm like, well, I think the answers are probably inside me. I probably don't have to search for them outside of myself. But recently I started doing float tanks. I've only done it twice, but that was pretty cool. I feel like I got the experience of meditation through that.
The float tank, is that the one where you just go in and you just float for like 10 minutes and then you just empty your mind kind of thing? Or how does that work?
Yeah, well, it was 90 minutes, but it's sensory deprivation. And so I think it kind of forces you to meditate because you could leave, but you're not going to leave because you paid for it. And so you get the benefits of it. You're not going to like give up after 5 minutes and be like, this is stupid. Like I probably would do that if I was meditating in my house. I'd be like, F this, I'm going to watch a show. But in the float tank, you paid for it. So you just sit there. And finally I noticed, after 30 minutes, I felt like wisdom was surfacing from within myself. And then I get out afterwards, I get on my phone and I write it all down as quick as I can. That
is beautiful. I love that you said that because I feel like in my journey, and first of all, I'm going to preface this for other people too. Like I personally believe that I know that tons of people like advocate for meditation or even for journaling, but I do feel like there's a million things out there that serve the same purpose, of like freeing up your mind and making you feel more at peace with yourself. So whatever that is, go for it. Right. But for me, I have found that, the more I go on this journey for myself of like self-discovery and really exploring and not being afraid of the feelings that I have, the more I find that I have always known what to do. And I'm not sure if you've experienced this the more you journal, but like for me, I've recently like come to terms with like, wow, I tend to always know the answer for most things. It just so happens that my fears or what I'm feeling tends to be, stacked with tons and tons of other doubts. And once I finally remove them and get to the core of the issue, I realize that the solution is very simple and that I've always known what to do. I didn't want to do it, or I was afraid, or whatever it was. And so for you specifically, do you feel like when you discover that you know what to do, is that through the process of like analyzing what you're feeling, or is it more so just through the process of growing up and just writing down everything that comes to your mind?
It's actually this other practice that I was introduced to about a year ago of communicating with my inner child.
Oh, dude, yes, I've heard about that.
Yeah, it's awesome. So whenever I feel like the emotion, is kind of creeping up, or I'm starting to cry, or it's just overwhelming, I go in my room, breathe a little bit, like put my hand on my heart, and I ask my like inner little 4-year-old girl self, what do you need? And I just keep comforting her. And oftentimes there's freedom for feelings and emotions to surface that way that otherwise I wouldn't gain access to. Yeah. And a lot of times it is like you're saying, fear-based. A lot of times it's like, I'm worried about this, I don't know about this. And it's really such a cool way to let your fears surface and have a voice. You give the scary parts a voice, but you also have your adult prefrontal cortex there to comfort yourself, listen, come up with solutions. You're like an ally to yourself. It's a really cool way to do it.
It really, really is. Did you ever find out, and I'm not sure what you were feeling, but when I started doing that whole inner child thing, because I was taught this too, and I think there's different ways of doing it, but I was taught this by a really good astrologer, and they basically taught me how to like envision who I was as a child and really try and like tap into those emotions. And I quickly discovered that I was very angry at my inner child.
Wow.
I'm wondering, were you angry, or were you upset, or were you afraid for your inner child? What were you feeling?
I was freaked out, mostly freaked out that I'm not doing enough in the world, that I'm not making a big enough impact, that I'm wasting my time, that I'm, just another human wasting my time, wasting my life. And I think I was programmed as a kid to really, take my life really seriously and to like make a difference. And so I often just have to like tell myself to chill out, and it's all good.
I appreciate that. Can I ask, where did that pressure come from? If you know, like, do you remember or figured out where this idea that you need to do a lot or that you need to achieve a lot, where did that come from?
Well, it was raised very religiously. So it was for sure in this church mindset. And I was born in Sweden, and we went to a church there for a while that turned out to be a cult, like a full-on cult.
Oh, shit. What was it? Can I ask what it was called, or no?
KC, it's still a church, I think. It's in English, it's Christian Center something, I don't know. Yeah, like the main pastor had an affair with the worship leader, like just scandalous.
God damn.
Something like that. I mean, this is my 5-year-old memories, like when I was 5, so maybe that wasn't the exact details, but and then also I had the most amazing experience of having an older sister who's been so encouraging and just lovely and really believed in me. And that's really helped me a lot. It's given me like so much confidence, so much like footing, and I feel very grounded. I feel very lucky to have her. But at the same time, there also was this high expectation, that like I was going to do great things in the world. And she knows that, and we laugh about it now, but I think that came from that too.
Yeah. Wow. That's very interesting, because I grew up Christian too. I actually grew up Pentecostalist, if you know what that is. And I'm Hispanic, so I'm Guatemalan primarily. And in the Hispanic community, and again, I've said this before, so I don't want to bore people if they already know what this is about. But in the sake of this conversation, I grew up in a very devout Christian household. And a lot of Hispanic families tend to be very devout Christians, or they tend to be on the polar opposite, where they're very spiritual. They're very like into other practices, but very rarely will you find a Hispanic family that doesn't believe in anything. That's just not a thing. But anyways, my point being is I grew up in this very strict religious household. I wasn't really allowed to do much with music or anything. We were just pretty much existing to, exist for God, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And without getting too far into it, like I feel like that contributed a lot to who I saw myself in the world. I feel like a lot of my decisions early on were based on what I firmly believed in, because I grew up in this. I was born into it. I was taught to think a certain way. And it took me like 25, 30-ish years to like come to terms with the idea that like a lot of these decisions I made were based on a child or this kid that grew up in an environment that he quickly needed to learn how to protect himself. And so therefore I didn't really know what to do a lot of the times. You know what I mean? And so I don't know, like I don't know if I'm allowed to ask you, but I'm wondering, like, in this religious circle that you were you in it for a very long time, or was it only when you were a child? And if you were in it for a while, did you feel like that affected a lot of your decision making early on in your life?
Yeah, I mean, similar to you, it was the lens through which all of life was lived and decisions were made. And I was raised in a family that pretty much did like end of the world apocalypse second coming drills, and
Yeah.
I was told, Jesus would come back any minute and, they'll want to cut your head off. Like I was like 5 or 6 years old, like trying to imagine being, what's that word when you're like a martyr, like
A
being
martyr.
a martyr.
Yes. Good.
Yeah.
Yes. I remember that
You
word.
know, yeah. And it was, I mean, so much fear too of, well, if you could go to hell, or, you're the only Bible in this case that your friend will ever read. And so if you don't do a good job being a Christian for them, then they could go to hell and it's kind of on you, and
Yeah.
too much guilt about, oh, Jesus spilled his blood for you. And but like, I don't think people mean for it to sound as crazy, but it's quite insane. Some of these things they teach little kids, and they teach you, to hear the voice of God when you're 4 or 5 and you're like, I don't know. And I think a lot of people made a lot of stuff up. But yeah, I was really of course, that was my truth. That was my reality. And I used to be mad about that, but now I try to have compassion on that and be like, well, of course, Ariel, like that's how you were raised. What else? What would you expect? You were doing the right thing that you thought was right. You were being the good Christian girl, and you were kicking ass at it. I was like the best at it, like
Yeah.
I dominated in this space that I was in. And the only way that I got some distance from it was seeing that it wasn't contributing to my well-being. It was actually taking it in the opposite direction.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is the more I learned about myself, the more I explored and became okay with who I was and my choices, and I came to terms with like everything that we've been talking about, the less worried I got about, a lot of these concepts that I was taught to as a child. Because I got to be honest with you, even though, and I'm being honest here, like I still identify as a Christian, but in reality, like I don't really participate. I'm not really a big fan of like how things are done, but I do believe in a higher power, but I'm also like in this journey where I'm exploring a lot of different concepts and just taking whatever resonates with me, I take it in, and I think that's a pretty healthy place to be in. But I find that the more, and this sounds super cliche, dude, but like the more I find myself, the less I care about the afterlife, I guess you can say. The less I care about like what comes after. And I'm not sure if that's something you've experienced before, but that's something I very recently became aware of. I'm like, wow, I'm not so worried about the very distant future as much the more I work on myself. Isn't that interesting? Like that's something no one ever told me that would happen. If I figured myself out, if I really became confident in what I am, the less I would need other people's approval, including an organization like a church. You know what I mean? And that's where it gets like interesting when you think about it. It can go deep.
Right. And the concept of God too, if you're no longer trying to earn God's approval, or you don't have that in the back of your head, like God is always watching and I could do this wrong or F this up or get in trouble, or, they talk about like grieving the Holy Spirit. These are phrases that are thrown around in the church. Like it's some heavy stuff. And there is so much freedom when you stop living your life entirely through that lens. That's been my experience.
I agree. It's funny. When I was Thanksgiving with my parents, they're still very devout, and we were just having a good time. We were all dancing, and then my mom started dancing, and then she immediately felt guilty because she's like, "Oh my God, Jesus saw me dancing. I'm not allowed to do that." And we just laughed. We just laughed. We hugged her. Like she's getting older. She's kind of getting over it. But it's just interesting watching your parents react in this very like way that you probably would have acted years ago, in a similar fashion at least. And then now that you're not there. Anyways, I don't know. I really appreciate you being honest to kind of go down this road because when I read up on who you guys were and what you were about, I did read some comments on your bio and stuff, how you guys were, known for some of your religious overtones in your music. And I'm glad that we kind of went this route because I was curious to kind of pick at it a little bit on how, I guess the question is, when you guys made your music, did you think of yourself as like a Christian band, or were you even trying to do that at all? Like what happened there when you were when you first started making music, if I can ask?
Yeah, no, because I had been raised in that space, I knew how Christian music worked, and I knew that it got stuck there and it didn't really, you didn't really have the same kind of legs or impact that music that wasn't made for Christians did. But yeah, that was never the intention. We never tried to be a Christian band at all. Like, that's so not interesting to me. However, because we were making music that I guess didn't have any profanity in it, and because I was like fully dressed, I don't know why, but Tooth and Nail, a band with, more Christian artists reached out. And at the time we had a conversation with them. We explained, hey, this is not the space we want to be in. And they were great with that. They were like, yeah, no problem. We're not going to market you in the Christian space. Like, we got this. However, turns out, after the fact, we find out that that's where all their connections were. Where their reach was. So we were starting to be like, oh my God, why is our music in Christian bookstores? Why are we included on this sampler being sent to youth groups? Like, what the hell?
Holy shit.
Yeah, it was so bizarre, and then after we got signed, we started getting offers to play all these Christian festivals, and they were so lucrative. Like, it was $2,000 for a show, and that was more money than we'd ever seen. And so at first we were like, no, we can't do that. And the label was like, hey, if you don't play these shows, we're not going to market your album. And so we were kind of strong-armed into it. And so I understand why people would be confused. I would have been confused if I was watching. I was like, what are they doing?
Wow.
It was confusing. But that was never the intention. And I will say too, like, the label never once asked or gave any indication about caring about our personal spiritual beliefs. So, like, it just so happened that I did at the time sort of align with Christianity, but like many of our band members did not. Like, one of them was a huge atheist and like not at all practicing what people would consider those values of, straight Christianity. So it's weird to me. Like, we could have very much been not a good look for them. I don't know.
Yeah, but somehow you guys made it work. Can I ask, how did you guys manage to break away from that? Because I feel like a lot of people that know you for your older stuff probably still think of you as that. But I feel like as you've evolved as a band, and I could be wrong, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you've managed to somewhat break away from that. How did you guys manage to do that?
I don't know. Like, we've been trying to be ourselves the whole time. So it makes sense that now, as I've personally evolved in some of my own personal beliefs, that we would also be in different spaces as a band. But it breaking away from the label is really what did it, because then we were no longer beholden to them. We didn't have to market ourselves in that space anymore. And we were able to start playing normal things like Warped Tour and, opening for bands like Hollywood Undead. And really, then there was no question of censoring our music. Before, with Tooth and Nail, we didn't have the option to use, language in our lyrics if we wanted to, or say everything that we wanted to. And then when that was gone, we were able to.
Yeah.
I'm sure people still think of us as a Christian band, and that's fine. And it sucks because then they're going to be disappointed with who we are now, and then there's people maybe now who'll be disappointed with who we used to be, but we just have to show up in our authentic selves and know that it's okay to evolve. And it's cool that our band can be an example of evolution, because I've personally evolved, so the music should too.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're very comfortable with that you're very comfortable with, like, this is our identity, and whatever happened, and I'm hoping that people are receptive to that. In your experience, do you feel like, well, actually, on that note, has there ever been a case where you've been aware of where, like, there might have been a group of fans or people that came to your shows and somehow they discovered that you weren't necessarily aligning with their beliefs? Did you ever experience like anything negative or like any kind of hostility coming from any fans? I mean, I'm hoping not, and I'm really hoping not, but I'm wondering like if there's any like interesting things that might have happened in that spectrum, because I can totally picturing that happening to somebody who's devout. And not saying anything negative about being devout, but I can see that happening towards someone being a very devout believer and then figuring out that one of their favorite bands does not align with their views. It might shake him up a little bit. I don't know. I'm just wondering.
Yeah. I think I've seen some online comments of that. I don't think we've gotten much. The memory that stands out to me is at one of those Christian festivals that the label made us play, a woman approached me afterwards and sort of chastised me, like got mad at me because I didn't mention anything about spirituality on stage from the show. She's like, why didn't you talk about Jesus? And I'm like, what? Like, it was just so out of left field. And she was upset, and people trying to convince me that I should be vocal about, like, well, that's so crazy. Like, if it's not in me to talk about, why would I talk about it? That's just bizarre. You get up there, lady, if you want to talk about it, So there was some of that, people being disappointed, but all that did was teach us to just keep staying true to ourselves, because you're not going to make everyone happy.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm so glad you said that, because that is true. And I think as musicians and as artists, it's so vital to just be able to be comfortable with what you're doing. And so I do appreciate your honesty and explaining like who you are, what your band is about, what your music's about, because I do feel and get this very genuine honesty optimism from you, and I feel like your music reflects that to some extent. Let me ask you, when it comes to making the music that you feel most proud of, that you feel like that really exemplifies what the band is about, what are some of the
Mhm.
themes that you guys usually try to talk about? Or at least when it comes to the songwriting process, what are some of the emotions or things that you're feeling that you want to get across when you start writing your music?
Yeah, I think I always tend to be the most excited about and the most proud of anything that was a pretty accurate, raw, authentic snapshot of where I was in the moment. So like we've got this song in the upcoming album that's called Panic Attacks, and it describes this like horrific experience of panic attacks, that I've gone through. And I just felt so happy to get to concisely sum up my experience in a way that like has a beginning, middle, and end and fits in a 3-minute track that now I can always have that. Like it's a souvenir
Yeah.
of my pain and my experience. And then, so anytime I can do something in a really honest way, but also if I can craft something or say something in a way that doesn't just show, hey, here's the pain I've gone through, but that can also leave the listener in somewhat of a better place. That's always important to me too, because I know being the listener as a 13, 14-year-old, if I was listening to a lot of stuff that was too dark, that always kind of put me in the wrong headspace, in the wrong direction. So I'm always kind of towing that line of too dark versus also balancing it out, like the ebb and flow, the light and the dark. I always try to represent both in my music. So anytime that I share what's going on in the mess of my heart and in my brain, and I share that in a real accurate way, that's something that I feel good about.
Yeah. Has there ever been a song or piece of work that you have worked on that was very emotional to you? Like maybe and I asked this because I feel like someone like you might have done this. I don't know if you did, but I have discovered that a lot of other artists who have made progress similar to you, and by progress I mean like deep inner progress, there's usually like 1 or 2 tracks on their whole catalog where they were very open and very honest, even if it was thematically open. Maybe they weren't obvious about what they were feeling, but I find that there is usually sometimes like 1 or 2 pieces of work where they're being very open about what they were feeling, and that song connected with many, many people in an emotional level. I guess I'm just wondering, like, if have you ever made yourself like super vulnerable in any piece of work that you feel like that you might have felt, or you might have had cold feet at first, like being like, wow, do I really want to be this open with this piece of work, and you still did
Yeah.
anyways? So is there anything like that in your catalog?
Yeah, I'd say that's my whole experience of being a musician is like, oh shit, will this work? Will people get it? And then like lots of people being like, you're not special at all. We all feel like this. And I'm like, okay, good. I'm not crazy. So it's a good thing. But a few songs that come to mind specifically are, one is called Under the Knife, which is on our last album that was exploring the topic of self-harm. And that was a topic I'd wanted to talk about for a long time, but I didn't know how to do it in a healthy, constructive way. And so I feel like I finally was able to put that idea together in a cohesive song. And the other one was called Now You Know, and that was one of the first songs we released after we left the label. It's describing the experience of being a woman in the music industry and my frustration of how many times I get asked about what it's like to be a woman in the music industry and just the cliche lameness of all that. And that was a song that I was also freaked out about sharing because I'm not hiding behind any metaphors. It's very literally like, this is what it's like, now shut up. And so there was no room to hide. I couldn't be like, actually, it's about this, because it was so literal.
Wow. You know what's interesting? I talked to this artist called Luna Ora. She's a very, very talented rock artist. And
Yeah.
we had a very long conversation about just that, about like the whole stigma of being a woman in the industry. I can imagine how much it must fucking annoy you, because I never hear of other guys being like, hey, what's it like being a guy in the music industry? You never
Exactly.
fucking hear that. And I guess, do you feel like there is some serious progress being made in the way that women are being treated in the industry and entertainment industry as a whole? Like, do you, maybe even just music industry, do you feel like there is some progress that's been made?
Yeah, I feel like my experience is that I've been in this industry 13 years. For the first few years, I really wasn't in it. I was just trying to be in it. But yes, I've been a female in music for a long time, and it definitely seems like it's less and less of a big deal. However, I also don't know if maybe interviewers have heard that song and then they're scared to ask me, because I essentially call them out in the song. And so I wonder if I get less questions about it now that I've put that song out. But I have talked to a few of my fellow female coworkers in the industry, and they've had the experience that it's less of a novelty now. And the way that we fight it, the way that we fight back is by continually showing up and more representation, not just women, but people of all genders and orientations and races, and like just all of it. We all need to show up in the way that we can. And I think that's what's going to move us forward.
Yeah. And I feel like that is one of those important topics. I think what it is, if you don't mind me like chiming in a little bit on that, because I love asking very interesting questions. I'm not necessarily someone that likes to provoke, but I'm infinitely curious. And I feel like when it comes to, well, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't know what it's like to be a woman. I never will know. But I also feel like, based on what I see, it's incredibly unfair. And I feel like what ends up happening when people ask, you know, what's it like being a girl? What's it like being this? It's like this very polite way of trying to fit into that mold of like, look, I care. And obviously I can't speak for everybody, but it is a very, very fine line that I imagine would be very annoying to you. Like I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I feel like it's the same way when people ask me like about Hispanic stuff. You know, I'm like, it's very, very broad. And in my mind, I'm like, do you actually care? Or are you just trying to check off a box on your daily thing? You know?
It's the low-hanging fruit of the questions. It's like, yeah, let's just get it over with. And of course, I've been asked that, and all the females have been asked that so many times, that if you really would like to know, you can Google and find 10 other interviews where we do discuss it, where we discussed it earlier in our career before we got sick of that question, you know? So of course we're happy to, I'm speaking for all of us, me and all my friends, I'm happy to educate the world of what the experience is like. But I think the question is there room for women in music? Yes. Do we need more? Yes. Are we all doing all we can to move things forward? Yes. Can we be educating people? Because hopefully the times that we do answer those questions, we are educating ignorant promoters who make these all-female lineup bills, or we are pushing back against Revolver's Hottest Chicks in Hard Rock, which I was a part of in 2012, or what, you know, like hopefully we're moving things forward, putting it on people in the industry, the gatekeepers' mind, and knowing that we're not going to tolerate this shit anymore.
Yeah, I love that you said, oh man, your aggressiveness, I love that. That's necessarily needed. You know what I hate about in a way, what I hate about what you said, not about you, but you mentioned how like you were a part of like Revolvers, you know, 12 hottest. The one thing I find in the industry, which I fucking hate, is how like people can't forget shit. Like if you're trying to make progress, they'll be like, well, you were a part of this in 2010. I'm like, dude, I changed. I fucking changed. You know, I changed as a person. Can't you realize that? And I hate that people will constantly use that to try and like pin you back into this category. Obviously, I'm a man, so I obviously probably have not suffered nearly as much as you, but I don't know. I feel like I'm glad that you are the way that you are, and I'm glad that you are honest and aggressive in the way that you see this topic. And in general, I sense this honesty about your music and your band, and I feel like it's groups like that, artists like you, that even if we don't see progress immediately, I feel like that you provide and contribute to this aura of change that is necessary, you know? And I am grateful for that honesty.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I hope you're right.
I'm hoping so too. All right. Okay. So we did end up talking about your music already, but just to kind of start tying things off and ending things in the right way, tell me a little more information. If there is more information, I'd like to know a little bit more about your album. Like, when is it coming out? Do you have any performances, whether they're virtual or live, coming up? Like, give me the rundown of some of the stuff that you have on your plate.
Yeah, we have an album coming out February 19th. It's called Amorphous, and we just completed a really cool Kickstarter campaign for that just blew our minds, blew all our expectations. And so I was painting before this. I've been painting these canvas lyric sheets for our fans.
Oh, that's cool.
I'll be making hundreds of cookies in a couple days and ship those out. We're doing this big packing party on Friday, shipping out everyone's crazy custom made merch and everything. And so that's going to keep us busy. And then we just shot a really sick music video on Friday, like probably the coolest video we've ever done. And so I'm really excited about that. And then we'll have a virtual album release show on release day or right around there. We actually should figure that out. We need to start planning that. So thanks for the reminder. But we don't have any tours booked because we're too scared to do that.
Yeah, obviously. Well, you know, here's hoping that things can open up sooner than later, and then we can actually get back on the road, because I miss it too, man. Ariel, I want to say thank you so much for being on the show, for taking time out of your day to talk about yourself and being honest and open, because that's absolutely necessary. And I think it not only does it make for interesting conversations, I feel like collectively, the more honest people are about how they feel, the more confidence is built in everyone that listens, and they end up being confident in who they are. So I really do appreciate that.
Well, thanks, Eddie. I appreciate you having me and asking the interesting questions.
You're quite welcome. It was a pleasure to have you on.